Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm your host, Hena Zuberi, and welcome back to another episode of Justice for All Now. On today's segment, we'll be discussing Puerto Rico and the refugees at the border and much more. I wanted to invite my two guests today, and I'm going to introduce, you all may know them as the three Puerto Rican Imams. After the devastation left by Hurricanes Maria and Irma, which are still very much apparent on the island of Puerto Rico, which was battered by violent winds of up to 155 miles per hour and experienced very heavy rainfall. We saw those images. We all saw them on our TV screens. This was the strongest storm to hit the island in 100 years and has affected the entire population and still continues to affect the entire population. The island at that time lost all the electricity and communications, and the power grid was knocked out. Towers and poles were swept away and smashed against the sides of buildings and strewed across the streets. So our guest today at that time went to Puerto Rico to help, and they also participated in protests. So today we're going to be talking to them to find out what happened and what has transpired since that time. I'd first like to welcome Imam Wesley LeBron. Imam Wesley is a Puerto Rican convert to Islam. He's born and raised in New Jersey, Passaic, New Jersey, exactly. And he accepted Islam in 1998 and is a graduate of Mishka University, where he earned a BA in Islamic Studies. He served as the vice president of the Islamic Dawah Organization of Rockford, better known as DOOR, from 2008 to 2012, and he was the president of the Latino Muslims of Chicago from 2010 to 2012, while living in Chicago, Illinois. In 2012, he returned to New Jersey, where he's been serving as a regular lecturer for area mosques from 2012 to the present. He's a national speaker and main fundraiser for Islam in Spanish. And he was the national speaker and main fundraiser for Islam in Spanish, and one of the main figures in establishing Islam in Spanish Centro Islamico, a Latino-owned and operated Islamic center in Houston, Texas. I've visited. It's a gorgeous building. Everything is amazing there, mashallah. He's the co-founder and president of Esperanza Community Hub, under which he has led numerous humanitarian efforts to areas ravaged by natural disasters under the three Puerto Rican Imams project. He's currently the Imam of Jamia Masjid Islam Center in Boontown, New Jersey, and serves...
Was as well.
Pardon?
Was as well.
Oh, that was as well? Okay, you need to tell us where you are now. Okay. And he serves as the National Hispanic Dawah Coordinator for Y Islam. So where are you now?
So alhamdulillah, now I'm the National Hispanic Coordinator for Y Islam, alhamdulillah, and I'm also the coordinator for the Mass New York Reverts Reconnect program.
Okay, alhamdulillah.
And then, still the co-founder and president of Misericordia para la Humanidad, Mercy for Humanity, under which we run our project, the three Puerto Rican Imams projects.
Okay, mashallah. That's and that's a lot of work that has taken place in the past 20 or so years, mashallah, and we're really glad you're here. So as we do with our shows, we talk a lot about genocide. We talk a lot about injustices taking place around the world, and Puerto Rico is no different. And I see Imam Rios is here too. So let's bring him up too, so we can have a vibrant conversation. Let me also introduce Imam Rios. Assalamu alaikum, Imam.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam. So Imam Rios is the resident scholar of the Islamic Learning Foundation, and he was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to a devout Christian family. In his late teens, he yearned strongly to be a Catholic monk. Later joined the Capuchin Franciscan program in Wickliffe, Ohio, where he studied for 2.5 years, discerning a vocation as a priest while in his early 20s. During his studies, he studied Catholic and Western philosophy and theology. And during this period of his life, he discovered the path to Islam. He eventually traveled to Cairo, Egypt, where he continued his pursuit of Islamic knowledge for many years. And he's been honored to study both privately and publicly with some of the most preeminent scholars of Islamic sciences from Al-Azhar University. Some of his most influential teachers include Sheikh Saad al-Jawaz al-Azhari, from whom he received both specialized and general ijazat in hadith sciences and transmission. And currently you're based in Chicago. Oh.
Currently, I'm in Chicago.
Okay.
I'm in a little outside of Chicago, actually in Oak Brook Terrace with the ICNA Center. That's the headquarters for the Islamic Learning Foundation.
Oh, mashallah. Excellent.
And then with New Jersey in heart, because we have the three Puerto Rican Imams project. So between New Jersey and Puerto Rico.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So let's talk a little. Let's take us back to when this project started and your trip to Puerto Rico.
So, Sheikh, you want me to open up, or you want to?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Right,
you open up.
So, basically, in 2017, we know that Puerto Rico was hit with the unprecedented natural disaster, the storm that ravaged the island completely. That was about a Category 4, and some say Category 5. And as Puerto Ricans, we felt the pain, we felt the your people that have love for the island. We immediately met Sheikh Yusuf Rios, myself, and Imam Daniel Abdullah Hernandez, and we began to discuss on how or what can we do to help the island out, because we wanted to give back to our people. Mm-hmm. We immediately decided that we wanted to open up a 501c3 non-for-profit focused on, charity and, many different things that fall underneath that. And we filed for an emergency appeal with the state of New Jersey. And alhamdulillah, in 2 weeks, that appeal was accepted, and they gave us our 501c3 status. And we immediately began to collect funds to be able to go into the island of Puerto Rico. And, our sincere, small intention, subhanAllah, turned into something so much bigger because of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Mm-hmm. In our minds, we were like, if we can collect $10,000, $15,000 and just go there and just do a little something, we would be completely happy about it. And to our surprise, alhamdulillah, the Muslim community was extremely responsive, and we are extremely appreciative to all of the Muslim community around the U.S. completely, and outside of the U.S. as well, because we got support from everywhere. Mm-hmm. We were able to collect enough funds that allowed us to function for almost a year and a half. So what we would do is that we would enter the island for about 10 days and just get to work. As soon as we landed on the ground, boots to the ground, we already had a connection with CVS and the manager at CVS. We would pre-order all of our items. And it's amazing how Allah opened up doors, because the CVS, you couldn't pay for the items online or over the phone. They wouldn't take the credit card because you had to be present so that they can see your face. Mm-hmm. But he trusted us enough that he would order pallets of merchandise for us. He would text us and say the pallets have arrived, and just trusting that we were going to show up on the day that we were going to show up on, and pay for the merchandise, subhanAllah. So we ended up building an amazing relationship with him. And we were basically able to serve about 42 of the 73 municipalities that are in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a small island that, if you can run around the island, I always say, in 24 hours if you kind of, put in the effort, and kind of stay on the outskirts of the ocean. And immediately, we went in about 3 weeks after the storm, and it was some of the most difficult and painful memories that we have. Just seeing how it looked like a bomb was dropped on Puerto Rico. Everything that was once green was now brown. There was no water. People were looking for water just from the mountain water that was coming from the mountains. This is the water that they were bathing with. This is the water that they were taking a shower with. They didn't know if they were going to have infections from this water, because maybe up in the mountains some animals died in the water up there, and nobody knew. It was just, everything was guesswork, and the food storage was extremely low. We didn't see a huge response because of the Jones Act, unfortunately, where our hands were constricted in terms of the Puerto Rican people, has always been. Because of the Jones Act. So immediately we weren't able to get supplies from the outside world, because we don't have that ability to access the outside world. Everything has to come through America before the Puerto Ricans can actually take advantage of that.
Can you explain a little bit about the Jones Act, if you or Rios would like to?
So inshallah, I'll let Sheikh Rios explain a little bit about that. He's mashallah, that's more his forte, inshallah. But just to give you a little more details, so what we would do, basically, we would order all of this food, inshallah ta'ala. Then from there, we basically we made contact with different organizations on the ground, grassroots organizations. And all of these different grassroots organizations, alhamdulillah, they were people who just, either they had a 501c3, or they were just people who got busy, got a group together, and began to work. So there were a bunch of community kitchens set up all over the island. There were people literally taking food into neighborhoods and just handing out food out of the cars. There was people that, subhanAllah, they would create events and then invite people to the events. There were neighborhoods where, just family members in these neighborhoods were helping each other out. And basically we partook in all of that. So we gave food to the community centers. We gave food to the grassroots organizations, and kind of ran along with them into the wherever they were going. We would join them for that day, and kind of supply the food that they needed to give out to that day. We went door to door, literally, basically driving through the neighborhood, stopping in the neighborhood, letting people know we got food. People coming out of their homes, coming to the cars to get food, to get water, to get flashlights, and subhanAllah, this took us all the way to the point where we were actually recognized as well by the Senate in the Capitol building there in Puerto Rico in San Juan. We were actually able to go out with the head liaison of community affairs, Joyce Negron, who took us to her city of Corozal, and we actually served, her city, which was maybe about, we served about 150 homes within her city. And afterwards, she brought us back to the Capitol, introduced us to different people within the Senate, and they actually gave us a letter of thanks and recommendation for the work that we were doing there in Puerto Rico. And this took place for about 1.5 years, like I said, going in and out of the island. And then just recently, with the current earthquakes that have been taking place, and the ground continues to shake in the south of Puerto Rico, unfortunately, we ended up going back as well right after the earthquake, still while the ground was shaking, and while they were still being hit with earthquake after earthquake, so that we can go to the south and serve the people in the south. And we did the same thing. We contacted right away the organizations on the ground. Actually, they contacted us, and that's one of the most amazing things, that a lot of these non-Muslim organizations now, they reach out to us, the Muslims, saying, we have this situation going on. We would like to do this event. Can you guys help? Can you guys sponsor the food? So that's what happened with the earthquakes. They called us an organization called Alegría Pa'l Campo, bringing joy to the neighborhood. And what they do is they usually bring musicians who sing songs of spirituality and joy, joy to uplift them, while we came out and we brought the food and delivered the food with them. And these are part of the organization that we have continued to have a relationship with. And as things happen on the ground, they reach out to us, and then we reach out to the Muslim community, tell them these are the projects we have, and then we usually respond to those projects and begin to service them.
Has COVID hit Puerto Rico yet?
COVID has hit Puerto Rico, yes. COVID has hit Puerto Rico, and they're actually on lockdown as well. And they're suffering from that as well, which is also causing yet another food crisis and water crisis as well. And, because of the Jones Act and everything else. And, Sheikh Yusuf, you can go ahead and get into the Jones Act and some of those things that are preventing our people from being able to, get ahead.
Yes, please. A lot of people don't understand. They understand that when they hear that Puerto Rico is a territory, but they don't understand what exactly does that mean, and how that affects things going in and out, and affects the people themselves. So,
in brief, the Jones Act, in brief, is the policy of the U.S. to control the economy of the territory. So when you're talking about trade, everything pretty much is skewed in favor of the U.S. economy, primarily Florida. And the Jones Act, simply put, is saying that trade can occur with certain territories unless it's done by way of U.S. built ships. And it's a law that goes back to the 1800s, pretty much with the control of the U.S., with the U.S. taking control over the territories, in specific Puerto Rico. But right now, the situation that Puerto Rico is facing with the COVID is that a lot of the help that mainland U.S. is getting is not really reaching Puerto Rico because of the colonial status, even though they put it under another status, is because of the colonial status. So like right now, you had the stimulus checks that went out. Most, American families they were able to receive that money. Within Puerto Rico, they did not receive it until now. So you have things like that. So you have people that have been unemployed over 2 months without any real aid that's going to them.
Oh, wow.
That's why we tried to step in as a nonprofit, and we try to mitigate that as much as possible by trying to collect funds and making sure that, we try to make sure that those funds reach the people directly with minimal amount of mediation from the organization.
So can you tell us a little bit about the political situation there? I know at that time there were protests and people were extremely upset. What is the political situation now? And what are the demands of the people of Puerto Rico?
I mean, the political situation is going to, how it's understood, is going to vary based on the lens of the party that you belong to. That's the bottom line, to be fair about that. So the political situation remains the same at the core, that Puerto Rico has a colonial status and doesn't have the ability to make decisions on its own. And right now, what's happening, especially what's dominant since the time of Obama, is that you have, a group that's called the Junta, and that group controls the economic affairs of the island. And then pretty much you have one political party which is dominant over the island at the moment. And they're the ones that are kind of controlling the economic situation, along with those who have the most economic interests, which are basically whoever has the business interests, whether it's families or outside corporations. That's in general what's going on in Puerto Rico, that they don't have control over their own economic situation, and you have interests that come from different directions. If you start getting into the issue of the political parties, each political party is going to kind of give you their own reading without looking at an overall, comprehensive reading of the situation. So you're going to get a bias there. So, but the core issue is the colonial status of the island, that there's no autonomy, for the Puerto Rican people economically and politically. So it becomes difficult. Even if you belong to a political party, those political parties are still trying to work within that framework of colonial status, that they don't have autonomy to either become a state or either become a republic. That's
what would be the roadmap for them to become a state?
What do you mean? What did you say?
So I was asking, what would be the roadmap for Puerto Rico to become a state? And is that the will of the majority of the people there?
That's the issue that right now, that's a debated issue. You have a group that wants autonomy with reparations, and you have a group that wants statehood, and that has been the battle for some time right now. So the roadmap would be that Puerto Rico would allow first of all, right now, just if the Jones Act was removed, then Puerto Rico would be able to be self-sufficient, even if it were to remain as it is, a commonwealth, or if it were to become a state, or if it would become independent. So the removal of the Jones Act would clear the way for the economic situation of the island to be in a better condition. Because right now, the Jones Act pretty much penalizes Puerto Rico. Say, for instance, if the U.S. invests $3 million in aid to Puerto Rico, they're taking out triple the amount, of what they get in terms of benefit and profit.
So are there currently any movements over here that you can share with us? Any politicians over here who've taken that upon themselves to have that removed? Is that even on
I mean,
the?
that has been debated. There's the status of Puerto Rico right now really pretty much is in the fate of Congress,
Mhm.
the congressional position in the U.S. And there's a claim that some polls have said that the majority wants statehood, and there's another group that wants it to remain as is, and there's another group that wants independence. But the reality of the situation is that Congress is the one that decides what direction all of this goes in. Is the congressional vote, whether they want it to become a state or whether they want it to remain with its current status or whether they want it to go independent.
Mhm.
That
Is there
becomes
a
the issue.
champion for this cause in the Congress people right now?
What did you say?
Is there a champion for this cause in Congress right now? Anybody, any one of the Congress people?
There was a congressional representative that wanted, Gutierrez from the Illinois, he wanted independence.
Mhm.
And there's others that, they wanted to kind of remain as it is. And there's one that wants statehood, but Congress is not really going directly to the Puerto Rican people and seeing what they want.
Mhm.
So the voice of the Puerto Rican people on this issue is really unclear, even with the polls.
Mhm.
The polls, can be skewed, but to actually have a study of the situation and a just investigation, basically collecting the data properly. That's what I mean by just investigation. That's not the case. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and this is
So,
something that we also go ahead.
this issue has been brought up in the UN. There was there's a decolonization effort, that has been brought up. This issue has been brought up to the UN as recent as this past summer.
Mhm.
But right now, nothing can be done without Congress. That's the
Mhm.
bottom line. Anytime that this issue comes up, it kind of stays there. Even whether it's statehood or whether it's independence, it stays stuck at Congress.
Mhm.
Right. So the U.S. has not really properly dealt with this issue.
And I think the
And
difficulty
even
too,
historically,
and I think
when you go back to the more militant address of this point, which you go back, if you go back to like Lolita Lebron and those types of movements, which actually had militantly, addressed Congress violently. There was violence involved in that. There was a militant assault on Congress. Still, up to now, the issue hasn't been addressed properly in Congress. It's been ignored. And that's in part because the colonial status of Puerto Rico, benefits the U.S. administration and the U.S. economy overall, militarily and economically. That's the bottom line. So Puerto Rico stays in limbo, and it has remained in limbo for 500 years, whether it was under the Spanish crown or whether it's under the U.S. administration. And that's primarily the problem of the Puerto Rican people. And even now, it's worse because in the past there were more benefits with having the status.
and I think also a challenge is that when you begin to look at both sides, it's not just as an easy say, okay, let's become a state and things will become better. Because the reality is that, there's a certain lifestyle that people are accustomed to. There's a lot of poor people in Puerto Rico, right? Who right now, as we speak, if you live in your home, you don't have to pay for the taxes of those homes and things of that nature. Whereas if now you become a state, there are certain things like that are going to be imposed upon you. And can these individuals really, once these things are imposed, will they be able to survive? Will they become, what I mean? Would they further be pushed into poverty? And then, you have the other side as well that talks about, if we're independent, can we survive independence? Or will we become like a Cuba and the likes, or a Dominican Republic and the likes? So I think there's challenges on all sides of the coin, and looking at both sides and then trying to figure out what is the best solution for Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican people, especially where there's that distrust on behalf of the people regarding the United States, how the United States has been treating the island and the colonial status of Puerto Rico. Vieques has basically been destroyed, through the military, practicing that they do there of bombing and military, shooting their arms, that a lot of the people now in Vieques are cancer patients, right? Because of the effect of what happened because of the U.S. using that space. And even now in Vieques, since 2017, there exists no hospital in Vieques on that island. If they have to get treated, they need to come back to the mainland, and then you can end up getting stuck on the mainland if the ferries are not running back and forth. So there's a lot of distrust that happens because of that. Then when you have your president coming, he's throwing paper towels at you. And you say, what kind of disrespect is this that you're going to come and throw paper towels at us, and you're going to say that you're doing such a great job. But for those of us who are on the ground, we saw that there was no great job being done, not by FEMA, not by the U.S. government, not by anything. We're running around the island. We barely saw FEMA, right? We barely saw FEMA. And when you did see a FEMA center that was set up, it was set up, but they weren't really providing much. And even the kind of food that the U.S. government was giving, unfortunately, we're appreciative for whatever you should give us in times of hunger, right? You should be appreciative. But when you begin to feed people with spicy hot beans and things of this nature that their internal system is not used to eating, right? We're not Mexico, right? We're Puerto Rico. We don't eat spicy food in Puerto Rico. So when you begin to give them food that is going to not agree with their dietary needs, this also further exasperates the problem and causes issues and stuff like that, and they're not taking any of that into consideration. And then even after the fact, just recently they're finding warehouses full of water, they're finding trucks full of water, even the whole embargo of not allowing the containers to be released, right? There was containers and containers of food that were locked there on the ports and weren't being released. Why weren't they being released when the people were dying of hunger? I know that even we fundraised for a container, and finally when that container came out, it was full of baby food that was all expired. And it's like, we worked so hard to get the container, to put the food in the container and to send it there, and then all of a sudden when it's finally released to you, because we had some people like Powerful Puerto Rico, Kia Rosario, and some others who fought for that container to be taken out for the Muslim community, and after it was taken out, half of the container was unusable, even though, thank God we were able to at least take the baby food and donate it to kennels and places like this where they had animals, that the animals would be able to benefit from it. So when you have all of these things going on, the distrust of the people is just at such a high portion that it becomes difficult to maneuver, and then the people don't really have any confidence that you're going to do any good for them.
So, and I heard also and read about this too, that they're doing this on purpose so that the land values fall, and then people leave, and they try to get so they can now have that land, and it's cleared out for capitalist ventures in Puerto Rico. So, is this something that you have seen, or is this a feeling that is on the ground over there as well?
Good, Yusuf.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you were talking about the issue of the land.
Yeah, the selling of the land.
I mean, overall, because we got broken, we got cut off communication wise. I think that the primary issue, again, it goes back to the issue of Congress and not having a representative vote. The Puerto Rican people are taxed, but they have no ability to even choose the president, and they have no ability to even have control over their own economic affairs. With this basically this group that's controlling the economics, which is called the junta. Whatever money is taken from the island, it goes outside. It doesn't even go to the people themselves or to their needs. So there's some issues even on a constitutional level when you start talking about Puerto Rico's constitution, which are problematic in that there's no self-governance. There's no, even at the level of a state. And even it said, you have some people that have even told me the issue of even reservations in mainland U.S. have more authority over their affairs than the Puerto Ricans have authority over the island. So when you start talking about the issue of land or whatever, that becomes even problematic. Like right now, the agricultural sector in Puerto Rico, there's many people that are well-trained. Actually, the education level of many Puerto Ricans is higher than what you have here in the U.S. Women and people on average and everything. But the agricultural sector doesn't have any support from the government right now.
Okay.
You know, so when you start talking about those who are prepared to deal with agriculture, there's plenty, but they don't have the support like you see here of farmers or whatever. And when it comes to the land, even when it comes to the issue of people having the ability to deal with the land directly, the support that is needed is not there. You know, that becomes the issue, and everything is headed right now towards privatization.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, and we've seen that. We've seen that there's, you know, and people are, you know, people on the ground are fighting against that. There's, you know, Puerto Rico's, like I said, if you drive around the coast,
And
usually
so
all of the beaches are open
when
lands.
you look at, for instance, a place like where my family is at, where like in the Jabocoa area,
Mm-hmm.
Jabocoa was known for being a agricultural sector. There's only one native person that's really dealing with the agricultural sector. So that is, you know, is native. It has some support from the government. So when you look overall, the economy has been bankrupted. And if we compare the 80s to now, there's no comparison. When the factories were there, all of that stuff was shipped out. So a lot of the pharmaceutical sector, which is now during the COVID, is being discussed whether the pharmaceutical sector should be brought back to Puerto Rico. That benefited the U.S. That was bankrupted, and those people left, and all of the work that was there was taken from the Puerto Rican people. So there's a constant pattern of undermining the growth of the people there.
You talk about the junta. Can you tell us a little bit more about who they are? Are they indigenous to the land? Are they have they come from other overseas?
The junta is controlled from the mainland U.S., even though there may be some people from Puerto Rico itself that are there, is controlled from outside of the U.S. And basically is a fiscal control board that is controlling all the decision making over the economic affairs of the island. So they're the ones that oversee where funds go, you know, how they're allocated, and then you have, you know, the current political party that also has some, you know, weigh in over how that works. So the fiscal control board is an authority that is not appointed by the Puerto Rican people. It wasn't democratically elected. You know, it's not working within the interests of the people, and it's there really to deal with the debt. You know, to make sure that the debt that was incurred by the past administration, that debt is protected, and that the economy of the Puerto Rican people was paying off that debt prior to the Puerto Rican people getting any of the monies from his own economy to deal with his own situation. So that control board is there to make sure that the debt of the banks is dealt with prior to the needs of the people.
Needs of the people. So as far as policy is concerned, until Congress takes some action, there isn't much that you feel that the people in the United States who are concerned.
There's some suggestion by activists on the island, and to be honest with you, I feel that it's not a bad suggestion. That even if Jones Act was lessened, not even removed, if it's lessened, say for instance, a 10-year period, 5-year period, just as a matter to kind of ease with the political parties and all that as a compromise point. If that were to be done, then that would aid the Puerto Rican people dramatically. But primarily the issue of Congress itself addressing the Puerto Rican need, that's where it's all at. You know, and the Puerto Ricans here in the mainland becoming more engaged with addressing the congressional issue. Because Puerto Ricans on the island.
That was my next question. Who's leading that movement, and who is there anybody leading it, and what that push needs to come from Puerto Ricans who are on the mainland?
That push needs to come from Puerto Ricans on the mainland, and a lot of those who are representing the interests of the Puerto Rican people on the island who are on the mainland. You know, they don't do it well enough. That's the bottom line. They themselves represent the same interests that we see on the island. They get funding for being the leadership of the Puerto Rican people, but they don't address those needs.
So do you think someone like Amnesty or somebody else like that, some human rights organization, should take this up as a human rights concern?
This is a human rights concern. And right now, the struggle is not going to be in the UN, as many people claim. That struggle is within Congress itself. You know, that struggle is not within the UN. The UN can't do anything at this point. And it has been addressed in the UN. Congress itself has to take a decisive action. And the Puerto Rican people on the mainland have to push that issue. The voice of the Puerto Rican people on the island is frozen. and it remains frozen. This is a struggle that has to be waged by the Puerto Rican people on the U.S., in the mainland U.S., and it has to be addressed in Congress itself. Right? That's the only way that Puerto Rico is going to be removed out of limbo. And it constantly is in limbo. It's in a limbo status. Whether you talk about what goes on the island, is in limbo. Whether you talk about the politics of the U.S. mainland with regard to the Puerto Rican people, it's in limbo. It's an issue which constantly, when it comes to vote, it remains frozen. It was addressed in the UN multiple times, and it goes nowhere. So that really, if we want to see anything change, Congress has to give the Puerto Rican people on the island and on the mainland a voice. And once that issue becomes once it turns into the Puerto Rican issue, people having a voice in Congress itself, then it'll change. Okay. But because Congress doesn't deal with it, it kind of puts it to the side. The Puerto Rican people is not heard. It doesn't go anywhere.
So from what I take with this, and I'd say this to my audience, unless there is a mass movement led by Puerto Ricans on the mainland with support from human rights organizations and other political organizations who want to see, the full rights for the Puerto Rican people, unless that takes place, we are not going to see a change in the status of Puerto Rico. Now, I wanted to.
Right, but we have to include. We can't marginalize the island itself. The voice of the Puerto Rican people on the island has to be heard. It can't just be a mainland movement.
Yeah,
it has to be the Puerto Rican people on the island that their voice is heard, and they're in solidarity with what they want, whether we like it or not, with what they want, because they're the ones that are living properly within that territory, that island. That the mainlanders support what they want, and we break that barrier of Congress not listening. That's the main issue.
Definitely too.
Where that goes, we don't know. It may not be where we may want it to go.
Exactly. It's the right to self-determination, right? Right to determine their own how they want to be ruled and who they want to be ruled by. Well, at this point, I wanted to segue into over the past year, Americans have recoiled in shock and horror as observers who visited immigration detention facilities at the border, at our southern border, and report that children are being held in extremely cruel circumstances. These observers have told press that children at facilities such as the one in Clint, Texas, were sleeping on concrete floors and being denied soap and toothpaste. They described children as young as 7, 8, many of them who had never met these babies that they were taking care of. And a visiting doctor called the detention centers torture facilities. We know that at least 7 children have died, and I think the number has risen since we last researched this. Have died in U.S. custody in the past year, compared with none in the 10 years prior. More than 100,000 children are now being held by the U.S. government on any given day, and this is same in El Paso. 900 migrants were being held in facilities designed for 125. I think that we read these reports in, for example, the New York Times. I wanted to ask you two. Have you visited any of these detention centers? Either of you. I'm sure part of your work takes you in meeting and dealing with some of these families who have been torn apart. I wanted to get some of your input and insight on that, and why isn't what is going on in our southern border called a refugee crisis? We work with refugees overseas, where that's part of our work is, whether it's the Rohingya or it's other causes that we're working on, global displacement. Why is this what is happening on the southern border not looked at as a refugee crisis, as a forced displacement crisis?
What I can mention is that personally, I haven't been to any of the detention centers. I have been in Mexico quite a few times already, and have been able to visit Mexico and do some relief work there in Mexico as well. And specifically, I actually went to the border with the border mosque, border church that has been established there at Friendship Park. And I remember going there that day to Friendship Park and being able to experience what it's like to be on the other side of that big metal fence that goes out into the ocean. And on the U.S. side, it is, and it's incredible because on the U.S. side, it's just plain. It's just a big, ugly metal fence. On the Mexican side, it is painted with a beautiful mural and things of this nature. But the most painful thing was to be able to see children and family members to meet at this metal fence, and they only have a small window, right? And if it wasn't that the border church was established there on the American side, that window would be even smaller, because he established the border church there on the window on the American side, because if a certain amount of people didn't get there by a certain time, they would just close it and they would leave. So then people who are traveling days, weeks, months, just so that they can see their family members for the very first time, would get there and it's closed. So he strategically, Pastor John Fontaine, he strategically set up the border church where it would be done the service would be done the last half hour that the entrance is supposed to be closed at, so that they would have to keep it open until 1:30 p.m. basically. And when you go there and you see the people crying, and all they can do is basically stick their fingers through this little fence and touch fingers.
Let's take a moment and look at that film.
You see them crying, and you see them, trying to embrace each other and hug each other. It's really painful. You say, you really have an appreciation for what you have here, that, you don't have to go through those things. But at the same time, you say, why are we keeping these people from being able to see their families? And then the issue of that these are very, very, very bad people. And that statement to be made by our president is just even worse. Like I said, I've been in the depths in Monterrey, in the mountains of Monterrey, where the poorest of the poor are. And there was not one time that I felt unsafe, that I felt like I was going to be harmed. Rather, it was the total opposite. I found them to be people who are loving, who are humble, who will sit down and have a dialogue with you, will sit down and converse with you. They'll break bread with you. People who, mashallah, really, really great hearts. So the fear of allowing these people to come in, and then that fear of they're going to take our jobs, and, subhanAllah, most of the jobs that these beautiful human beings take, most of the Americans are not going to take these jobs.
And now
they're the hardest and the most difficult of these jobs, subhanAllah.
Exactly.
So
now
it's amazing,
essential jobs. Under COVID, those same jobs are considered essential. Like no one wants to do them. But can we take a moment to watch the film? We wanted to show the clip of you at the border.
Exactly.
That would be lovely to see that right now. To see that was something that I had been shown by Dustin Cron, the director, and it was a very powerful moment to see that, and see that solidarity between Christians and Muslims, and so that I think he's pulling it up, right?
I was told that here at this wall, people give Christmas to their loved ones, to their friends. Me dijeron que aquí, en esta pared, que la gente le dan besos a sus familiares y a sus amistades. I immediately wondered, how can it be possible that people are exchanging kisses here at this wall? Pensé, ¿cómo puede ser que la gente se están dando besos aquí en esta pared? And they told me that it is with the touch of a pinky. Me dijeron que es tocando dedo a dedo.
So the history of the place we're going, what locals call Friendship Park, is that for generations was a meetup place for people from U.S. and Mexico. It's a very important place for families that are separated by immigration status. Every weekend, 40 or 50 families come to visit at Friendship Park. They only do that because they have no other recourse to see each other.
Our intentions are to cross the border in order to visit the community in Tijuana, in order to unify the people.
Y así como es un lugar binacional, just like this is a binational area, también es un lugar birreligioso.
The event's name today is Prayer Beyond Borders, because we don't believe in borders, because we believe that people of the world, regardless of their faith, regardless of their culture, race, ethnicity, they have the right to connect. And there is nothing better to connect us than all of us praying and coming together.
We are all here in solidarity to show the world that no wall will stop us from being united.
On behalf of the Border Church, we bid you all a very warm welcome.
Reverend John, thank you so much on behalf of my community and everybody who is here. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to do this service together.
In a spirit of solidarity and friendship, we gather, recognizing that we are brothers and sisters in one family, the human family, that we are all children of one God.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
Allahu Akbar. سمع الله لمن حمده. Allahu Akbar.
Let us pray. A ti entregamos, Señor, este momento.
We give you this moment, Lord, onto your hands,
para que tú seas glorificado en todo.
so you may be glorified in everything,
En todo lo que hemos hecho,
in everything we have done,
en todo lo que hacemos.
in everything we do.
Amén.
Oh, highest God, our miraculous Savior, there's no one like you.
No hay nadie como tú, Altísimo, milagroso Salvador. No hay nadie como tú.
This was something that it was very beautiful to watch. Solidarity, and it really humanizes to me when I watch this, that how
Place our hands on the wall.
this is subhanAllah, just to be able to just touch someone across, and these are families that have been separated, and obviously the devastation that is going on in the detention centers. We lose a lot of our credibility in doing international justice work when we see these scenes, and honestly, people have told us that America has lost its right to dictate to anybody what any country does with any of their refugees, or with people who are in their detention camps, because of the way that we have treated human beings. So I want to hear your thoughts on this. What is stopping us from, aside from the fact that we have an extremely racist president, even the media has not framed this as a refugee crisis.
I wanted to jump in here. This issue is a humanitarian crisis. It's a refugee crisis from the angle of the politics of it, because you have to cross in, we have borders.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, it's a humanitarian crisis, and part of it was initiated by political and economic interests. This goes way back. This is not something that, especially when we start talking about the Latin American situation, this is a historical problem that goes way back into how the U.S. has dealt with certain issues. But also at the same time, we have to somewhere along the lines, we're going to have to talk about the responsibility of those countries in this crisis. We understand that the U.S. has its hand in this crisis. That's the political part. But at some point in time, there's going to have to be a cooperation between the U.S. administration and those countries to resolve these issues, which come from political decisions and economic decisions and military decisions. Our side is that this is a humanitarian crisis and this is an ethical issue. that's not going to be resolved with the situation as is. You know, this has gotten out of control. You know, we know that this goes back to the 80s, you know, Iran-Contra scandal. It continues on with economic decisions that are made by corporations and administrative decisions that are made by DC and these countries, right? But from our side, from a religious side, from a humanitarian side, it's a humanitarian crisis which just can't be dealt with as a refugee crisis and saying, well, we have to control the number of people that are coming into the border. These crises can be resolved if there's actual cooperation between governments to address these issues as they are on the ground, right? And what took place in the past at this point is what took place in the past. We can't continue. We also can't, you know, part of this issue is not going to be resolved by continuously just saying, well, the U.S. is at fault for its military strategy, its political strategy, is foreign policy. That's not going to do anything for the refugees on the ground. We need an actual practical strategy that's going to deal with the humanitarian crisis as is, because human beings are dying. And at the same time, it's not only that human beings are dying. This issue is being used by cartels, gangs, is being used by a number of different issues. You know, a number of different groups that make the issue complicated. So if we don't really have a tangible way of addressing it, the religious communities are the ones that are going to be stuck with trying to deal with the medical fallout, the human death casualty, or, you know, the situation of children, the justice issue, which it starts making the legal system look like a joke. You know, in other words, law and order goes out the door, because the way that this is dealt with is not by a law and order humanitarian strategy. The families are being broken apart, which is transforming the way that the U.S. has dealt with immigration issues. The U.S. was one of the only countries that did not break families apart when it came to the issue, right? And so we have to deal with it as a humanitarian struggle, and we have to address the issue of refugees from the light of where do we stand, you know, as far as the human being is concerned, human dignity. And I think that that's what we're losing. Religious communities are split over this. You know, how they deal with this. You know, political groups are split over how to deal with it. Somewhere along the line, there has to be a compromise, because it's not going to be my way or the highway approach, whether you're on the right or the left in this regard. You know, we forgot the human being, and this is something that we were talking about before in another forum. The dehumanization process is what everyone is agreeing on. Or just let the dehumanization process continue if our way doesn't win out. And we can't afford to keep that policy up. We right now could be the ones that are on, you know, that take this path. What happens if American citizens have to go across the border at some point in time? We would want that someone along the lines considers the human dignity side. And I think that that's what we're missing out on at this point in time.
So are you all working on any projects at the borders currently?
We support the Latino Muslim Foundation, which wanted to create a non-sectarian shelter, you know, that would be run by the Muslims in part to deal with this issue, at least just deal with the practical fallout. That was our issue. We didn't take the political side of it, you know, but our push has been to try to support that project. To be honest with you, it was a project which needed to be pushed, which we still need to push, and it doesn't have enough support. And guess what? Muslims are caught up into that reality. This is not just the issue of non-Muslims trying to come across the border. We're seeing Syrian refugees and others, you know, get caught up into that. Exactly. And mind you, it takes precedent, because you're talking about human trafficking. You're talking about human trafficking. You're talking about children dying when they come across the border. You're talking about people with health needs. And so it would seem that it's a project that would gain support, especially by the Muslim community, in a way which we don't want to get caught up 100% in the political side of all this. We don't want to get caught up in the political fallout of this, because then we're not going to be able to address the human need if we get 100% caught up in the political fallout. Because as you see, this is at a standstill. This is not only involving this border issue, is the global refugee crisis, whether it's Yemen, you know, or whether it's Syria, whatever. We actually wanted to go into Yemen. And we talked about going into Yemen, 3 Puerto Rican Imams Project. We were told you can't go in, don't even attempt to go in, because it's such a catastrophic situation, and you're getting caught up in the political issue. So we can't even go in to feed the people or to do any humanitarian work, which is separated from where the political situation is. And that's how this border situation is as well. We can't even really address the human need because we're caught up in the political problems.
I think one of the most important takeaways is that, and that I would like everybody to take away towards, because I know we're at the end of the show, is that I think that as Muslims, we need to be at the forefront of these things, highlighting them, demonstrating to the people what is really happening on the ground, inshallah ta'ala. And then in terms of aid and help and support, being there to aid, help, and support. But this really takes coming together, community, right? Coming together, all of these different orgs coming together to do this work together, because we can impact much more when we work together rather than working alone. And one of the things that 3 Puerto Rican Imams pride themselves on is community work, coming together and working with many different organizations. And that's how we were able to impact Puerto Rico, right? Collaborating through different orgs, we were able to cause a great impact. But as long as we remain separate and we don't collaborate and we don't work together and we don't push these, even the smaller orgs like Latino Muslim Foundation, and say, look, these orgs are doing good work on the ground. We need to figure out how we can support, where we can support, where we can give, inshallah ta'ala, and then highlight everything that's being done. We're doing it injustice. We're doing it injustice.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's the human being that falls off of the grid. The human need is what falls off of the grid. And it's difficult to collaborate because in the capitalist model, each org needs to survive. And so there's funding issues that get involved in this. But if we don't move out of that model, we're going to lose our original intent. But
beyond funding issues as well, I know that, there's also the issues that, there are a lot of our organizations and a lot of the Muslims who are immigrants themselves and are fearful of, of backlash against them personally, and them, not being able to stay in this country or something happening to them, their status as well. So I think that, those who, are really want to show a strong supportive voice, that we need to get together and kind of go out there and show that strong support and make that voice loud and clear, inshallah ta'ala, so that we can make things move and happen, inshallah ta'ala.
And then when it's led by the people who is affecting the most, and then everybody else sort of follows along. And I'm telling you, just the fact that when you all made the 3 Puerto Rican Imams, that normalized Puerto Rico for the Muslim community. It made it our issue because of you all. Just the framing of it, right? If it was Puerto Rico human rights, humanitarian project, it would not have had the same effect. But the fact that these were imams, people trusted, people, leaders of our salah, who were also going out and doing this work on the ground, that effect I have seen is so powerful. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you so much for your work. Jazakallah khair. And we'll try to spread the word as much as we can through our forum, and make sure that people understand and are able to follow along your work. So do visit 3 Puerto Rican Imams, stay in touch with their work, support their work. And if, as people in the peace and justice movement, if you see an organization who is working to defend the people at the border, to serving their human rights, serving their humanitarian needs, whether it's here or in Puerto Rico, I urge all of us to make this a concern, an issue that concerns us, because it is an issue that is our issue as well. Thank you so much for being here today. I'll see you tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.